Micah,
Yeah,
it's good to see you.
it's good to see you too. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So I have so much to talk to you about. And what's great about you is you definitely bring all the subjects of Jay's 4 questions together.
Good.
And my favorite subject, which isn't always the Jewish subject, is the food subject. But you're now in a place where you're bringing Judaism and food together on the same plate.
Yeah, just the spot I was always imagining to be in.
Well, so I want to go back to the beginning of your chef career because you started in fine dining.
I did.
And when did you know in your life that food and cooking was going to be your thing?
Pretty early on, actually. I mean, my parents always say from the time I was a little kid that I always said I wanted to be a chef. And I started working in professional kitchens when I was about 15 years old. And I remember even back to my bar mitzvah, like the centerpieces that I helped my mom put together were little herb gardens that had recipes by Micah. So it was always a very, lifelong kind of dream and pursuit. And just always what I wanted to do. I mean, grew up cooking a lot with my mom, my grandmothers, even my dad to some extent. And I always enjoyed being in the kitchen, being around food. When I got then into actual restaurant environment, when I was pretty young, I really fell in love with restaurants, which is it's a whole other thing outside of just cooking. Cooking in a restaurant is really, I always liken it to sport. I mean, it's the same adrenaline and drive that pushes an athlete is cooking for a busy service, a busy dinner in a restaurant. So I really fell in love with that when I was pretty young too.
And in terms of your formal training, did you go to cooking school?
Yeah, I didn't go to culinary school. I went to Cornell to hotel school, which is more learning the business side of the restaurant business. I generally don't really believe in culinary schools, or at least not for me. I sort of followed a more old school path to how I got to where I was at, which was learning on the job essentially and apprenticing in restaurants here in New York and in Europe and trying to build my toolbox and really learn from the best chefs. And that's the way that I did it.
And do you, now when you look back in your career, because it's as young as you are, it's been a long career.
Yeah.
Did you have mentors, people that really helped you along the way?
I definitely did. I don't have a mentor in the traditional sense of this is the one person that I always call for this, outside of my dad probably, because I call him often for advice. But, in terms of the chef and the business community, I have different chefs that mentored me a lot as I came up, that I learned a lot from, some of whom I still rely on to this day for certain things. I mean, people like Gino Angelini. When I opened my first restaurant, Meze, a chef that I had worked for at Kraft here in Century City by the name of Matt Accarino was a great mentor to me, and really, when I was calling up, hey, how do I do this? Who do I talk to about this? Well, I'm nervous about this. He helped me with a lot of those things. And even to an extent, a chef like Joel Robuchon, who I worked for in New York, who, probably wouldn't know me had we been face to face on the street a year or two later, is definitely somebody that I consider a mentor because he had such influence on the way in which I cook, the way I approach food, the way that I think about it, and the, sort of the methodology behind it.
So go back to your house. You have a very accomplished father in the Jewish world.
I do.
A guy who convenes a lot of conversations about Jewish life. What was it like growing up in Los Angeles in your Jewish home?
It was great. I mean, I grew up in a very traditional home. We went to a conservative synagogue, grew up keeping kosher, observed all of the holidays and a lot of the rituals, but not to the strictest level. I mean, while we always had Shabbat, it was also once Shabbat was over. Once we'd had Shabbat dinner on Friday nights, and we were in high school, it was fine to go out afterwards with friends and that kind of stuff. But it was also, I think what was great about it is it created a home environment that was a center for our family. I mean, our family was over often. Friends would come over for Shabbat or other holidays who, maybe they did or didn't celebrate it in their homes. But growing up in kind of a deep, rich Jewish home was a very big part of my upbringing. And it's something that I try to emulate today in my home with my family, and it was really important and something that I think built a lot of identity for me and consciousness. It was also very important to my parents that Judaism and being Jewish wasn't the only lens that we saw the world through, and that that's where I think the LA part of it comes in so great, because it's such a dynamic city and it's so diverse. And it was very important to my parents, even though I went to private Jewish school all the way through high school, that we had experiences outside of just the Jewish bubble and understood the world on a grander scale. And I think having the unique opportunity to bring both of those things together was really important for me.
But going back to the bubble, did you have a Jewish aha moment?
How do you mean?
Well, oftentimes when people talk about their identities, there's something that triggers them feeling, being Jewish is always going to be an important part of my life. So was there a moment that you thought that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I could say one moment like that. I think that for me, being Jewish was just like one of those things that was always there. I mean, it's just very natural to my life. It's as far back as I can remember, the traditions and culture of Judaism have always been there, from summer camp to Jewish schools to holidays and home and everything. So it was really just, I was raised with it very much from day one. I think one of the interesting things actually is almost being raised with so much of it through my high school years. When I went to college, I remember my dad being a little upset that I wasn't connecting with Hillel there and the Jewish community, and he even went to one point, of course, it's so typical of my dad, he calls Hillel up at Cornell and says, hey, my son's there and he's Jewish and and you guys got to get him involved and reach out to him. So next thing I know, I get a call from the the Hillel director. Hey, we just want. I was like, how did you know I was here? How did you know about it? Oh, well, your dad called. And, I call up my dad right away. I was like, what's wrong with you? I'm doing my thing over here, okay? And I think that it took a while into my adulthood to learn how to create my Judaism and what that meant for me, because as a kid, it was always it was so there. It was so accessible and always made. So it took a while for me to figure it out on my own.
So you are one of the people in the forefront of an old movement becoming new again.
Yeah.
Right? When you think about Jewish communities around the United States, there's always that my favorite deli. It's
right.
Second Avenue, or it's Katz's, or it's here in Beverly Hills been like Nate and Al's, or everybody in every community has a favorite deli, or they say, we wish we had this deli, right? And then all of a sudden the new wave comes back. People are reimagining and rethinking about deli food. Mm-hmm. So Wexler's Deli is one of those places now that you've created. You've gone from fine dining and your family's table, Shabbat table, to smoking your own, corned beef and fish and you are creating a new identity for what a deli could be for, frankly, your generation.
Right.
How'd you get there?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I grew up with delis. I always say that. I think for an Ashkenazi kid who grows up in a LA, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia type city, deli is just always there, right? Somebody's being born, somebody's dying, somebody's getting married, whatever it is, like any kind of life cycle event, the deli's always there. And that was very present in my life. So I've always been, I love deli culture and I love the food that comes with it. And I was sort of at an interesting crossroads in my career where my first restaurant had closed. I was in this in-between place. Okay, what am I doing next? And my business partner and I had talked for a while about, we should remake the deli. There would be something very interesting about that. People are just starting to tackle it, these guys in Brooklyn or maybe these guys in San Francisco, but it hasn't come to LA yet. Nobody's really doing it. Nobody's approached it from the chef way. Let's think about what this could be. And from the get-go, we wanted it to feel like a deli. We wanted it to have the traditional foods of a deli, but we also wanted to update that feeling. I didn't want to update the food. I didn't want to do a spin on the food or an interpretation of what a pastrami sandwich would be. I wanted to say, okay, let's take the pastrami sandwich, let's break it down into all of its elements, look at each one, let's make them all in-house, put it back together, and hopefully create the best pastrami sandwich that you've ever had. And so, but that feeling of a deli is still there. But also feels like a deli that is very reflective of my generation, and not necessarily my grandparents' generation and what they would want in a deli. And it's taken us a while to sort of bring those two worlds together, but I think we have. And now it works out. It works out really well.
And I ask all my guests if they what their favorite Jewish food memory is. So,
yeah.
You referenced your Shabbat table and things like that. Was there something growing up that that is a trigger for you when you think about Jewish food?
I think, look, I'm very lucky to have come from this family that has fantastic Jewish cooks. But if I was to really zero in on one, it would be my mom. We always have Pesach at my parents' house and a lot of holidays. And the first thing usually to get made is the chicken soup. My mom would start making it, early in the morning or sometimes even the day before. And the smells of the chicken soup would just kind of waft throughout the whole house. And I remember always actually being woken up by it. Just that rich, smell of the chicken that would literally pull me out of bed and be like, oh, Mom's making the chicken soup right now. And I kind of run right to the kitchen to see what she was doing and start to get involved. And my mom, whose name is Dana, the chicken soup that's on the menu at Wexler's is Dana's matzo ball soup. And that's sort of in homage to that memory and to her.
So did you use that recipe or it's
I should say that I definitely started from that recipe, and it is substantially similar, but it's more about taste, memory,
right,
and inspiration, the feelings behind the recipe.
Because I look at I have this very right now stained card that is my mother-in-law's recipe.
Yeah.
And I have very fond memories of my grandmother, who was Hungarian's recipe for chicken soup. And I look at it now and I think, well, there's so many tweaks I want to make. I understand why it tasted good at the time,
right?
But it's not my palate today,
right?
Right. So we're living in a health conscious situation. We can certainly talk about chicken schmaltz and things like that.
Yeah.
But on so that the different flavors and when I think about the great bowls of chicken soup I've had in the last few years, they don't taste very much like what I remember growing up.
Yeah, but I think that's okay too, in what you said of it informs your consciousness, but it might not be exactly what you want, right? It's you want to look at these traditions and look at these recipes. Look, no matter what I'm cooking, whenever I'm making something traditional, I will often look over a couple of recipes to get a sense of where did this dish come from? What are its roots? I mean, last night, I made a Palestinian dish called maklube that you might be familiar with. It's like a big baked rice pie layered with chicken and all these vegetables and everything. I've never made it before. I've eaten it probably 10 times before in my life. And there was a new cookbook that I had that I was looking through, and I saw it in there. I was like, oh, I want to make this. And I just sort of read about it a little bit in a few books that I had, and then I started to put it together on my own.
Right.
And that's the way that I tend to cook when I'm cooking the traditional foods. And I think that that's a good thing. If you have a skill level that's at a certain point where you have that ability to sort of look at it and then put it together in the way that you want to put it together, I still think that's very respectful for the traditions. And for me, when I do it, I'm just always trying to achieve this place of purity and this place of perfection. When I think about chicken soup, I've had chicken soups all over the map, right? And for me, it's about this pure intensity of flavor of the chicken, of the vegetables, a back note of the dill, and then bringing you back to the chicken again. And I'm after that exact experience, and the way that I go to get there might seem roundabout to somebody else, might seem convoluted. Oh my God, this is a million steps and whatever, but it produces what I think is that perfect thing that somebody eats it and they have this memory and they're sort of awash in oh my God, I'm 6 years old again in my grandmother's kitchen, whatever it is. That's the best thing that can happen when you have the traditional foods.
No, right. I read cookbooks for pleasure. I have a million of them, and I try not to follow recipes when I'm cooking.
Yeah.
I had Joe Nathan was on the show, and I kind of made her chicken soup without realizing it was hers. And after I made it, I thought, well, where did I remember that from? And I went back to her cookbook, and I was telling her that, I think it was maybe a year before I actually made that chicken soup that I was referencing it in my head. Right?
Yeah.
So it's, it's when I wake up in the middle of the night, I find myself writing recipes, not saving the Jewish people, which is probably it's a little
But
challenging.
what's interesting though is that you have those recipe cards. I have a lot of those recipe cards from my grandmothers, even back to my great grandmothers, and I. Often my wife is pushing me all the time of, you got to start writing your recipes down, not just on the computer, but build a recipe book so that our kids and our grandkids have it one day, which I think is a great idea. And I love the idea. There's something so tactile about those recipe cards and being handwritten and having the stains on them versus, I have, an Excel file 1 million pages long of all different recipes and cuisines and everything that I've made, but they're not the same as those cards that, fit in that little fabric box and you can touch them and feel them. It's just a different experience.
Right. No, it brings you back. But obviously you need to do your own cookbook.
At some point, yeah.
Well, no, I would argue sooner than later.
Yeah.
Especially since, Wexler's Deli is now in multiple locations. Throughout Southern California.
I got to talk to Joan about that and maybe get some pointers.
I think, everyone has a cookbook and people have more than one cookbook. And like I said, people think, I don't mean to demystify some of the things you're doing,
sure.
But, curing fish, smoking fish, you can do at home.
You can do it for sure.
And there's a pleasure in that. I'm not telling people not to go to Wexler's and do it, but you have a certain spin, and there is these new delis. I think I've told you before, when I go to Boston, I always go back to Mama Les.
Right.
I'm going in a few weeks for my mother's 90th birthday, and I said to my daughter who's coming with me, are we going to Mama Les? Obviously in San Francisco, there's a
sure you have wise sons,
right? Yep. Very different deli here. Now there's Friedman's doing some spins on things, but you're growing and having a book that people can buy in the restaurants.
Yeah, no, I would definitely like to do a book at some point. It's, I think for me, it's obviously it's an undertaking for anybody, and everything that I approach, I always want to be done at a high level and really work on all the details of it. So I know that it would be a huge undertaking. So it's definitely something that I'd like to do at some point. Probably won't be tomorrow, but I'd like to do it eventually.
And I know you have a lot of things going on at the same time. So you're also a new dad.
I am.
So mazel tov on
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I have a completely non-food related question to
Sure.
ask you, which is, as you look at your child grow up, your daughter grow up, what do you think the greatest challenges facing the Jewish people are? What do you want for her, and what do you think we should be dealing with so that the Jewish life you had, she's able to have easily?
Yeah, that's a deep question. Look, I think one is definitely that I want her to be able to have the kind of opportunities that I did. The things like being able to go to Jewish school, to Jewish summer camps, Israel trips, that kind of stuff. I want her to have access to those same kind of things and to be able to provide those things for her and for my family. That's an important thing. I think that, especially in a city like Los Angeles, but just in America in general, that there's, an intersectionality of people's religions, cultural beliefs, and everyday life in a way that there hasn't been before. The way that people, what shoes you choose to buy, what restaurant you choose to eat at, where you choose to go on your vacations, where you like to work out or what kind of workout you want to do. All of these things are becoming part of this common ethical choice, if you will, that everybody is making all the time. And I think one of the things that really informs that ethical choice oftentimes is religion, whatever that religion may be, or whatever cultural identity that you have that starts to line up your politics, your buying decisions, all of that kind of stuff, that all of these things are really getting interwoven into one. And I think that that's such an important place for the Jewish community to really be working and to be recognizing that these aren't separate things in people's lives anymore, and that they really want to have this ability to bring all of them together under one roof. And I think that's only going to continue to grow more and more for my children. And I think that's a really important place to focus.
No, look, I think with all the things that are happening, globalization, access to everything in the palm of your hand, I fear that identities are going to be all over the place. And for me, the perfect stew is a stew where you taste this wonderful taste of the whole stew, but as you described it in your chicken soup, you're able to, the carrots taste like carrots.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the beef tastes like beef.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in order for the carrot to taste like carrots, if we're using that as an analogy for Judaism, you have to be connected to
Agreed.
What it means.
Yeah. I mean, look, we don't want everybody's culture to become the same and to become one. There is something very, very interesting and very deep in being able to see the different cultures, to celebrate them, and to take part in them. And I definitely agree with that. And I think that also it's going to be, important for the Jewish community to, as much as we focus on ourselves, what's important to the Jewish mission, to also look beyond that to our communities as a whole, to our cities as a whole, and say, hey, what are the shared values that we're having, or what was, an experience that happened to us that's maybe happening in the same way to another population now, that we need to get involved with that community, and we need to treat them and as our own, and help them in the way that maybe we had hoped 50 years ago, 100 years ago, somebody had been there to help us. I think that is something that should become increasingly important to the Jewish world, and not just a focus on, hey, what's happening to Jews and what do we need to do for Jews.
I agree. And look, if you look at your career trajectory in terms of cuisines, there is an interesting arc, right? You've been in the Italian world, you've been in the French world, then you got to the Middle East. I miss that restaurant very much.
So do I.
Especially since it's so close to my office. And then, and now you're in the deli world, right?
Yeah.
So you found your way, in a way, back to the food that you grew up with, to your mother's
I did.
chicken soup.
It's very true. And, the interesting thing is, when I look back at it, when I opened my first restaurant, I was 27. So there's a certain level of maturity there, but there's a lot of experience that's missing also. And when I start to see where my opening menu, from what it was 2 months later, 6 months later, a year later, and beyond, and my Jewish roots started to work their way into that menu more and more over time. And I think part of it was, look, I'm always somebody that cooks what's in their soul, what's in their heart, what's in their head. So part of it was that coming through, but part of it was also me getting more and more comfortable and feeling okay to say, I remember the day that accidentally from the meat company, 10 pounds of chicken livers came in, and I was going to send it back. And I was looking at these chicken livers and thinking to myself, they're beautiful. They're so fresh, which you don't normally think of chicken liver in that way of it's beautiful, right? A lot of people have sort of a visceral reaction to it, but they were so fresh and perfect. I said, I'm going to keep these. I'm going to make a beautiful chicken liver mousse, and it's going to be super smooth and creme fraiche and very French and the whole thing. And I started to get my mise en place together for it and make it. And I was just suddenly hit with this feeling and image of my grandmother's chopped liver. I said, you know what? Forget about that. I'm making chopped liver instead. And it's probably never been on anybody's menu in this city before, but who cares? I'm going to put it on. We made a little, an amazing chopped liver, a little beautiful challah, plum mostarda, that these, plums that had come from the farmer's market, put it on the menu. It became one of our most popular dishes. But there was a part of that that was risky, because it's this very peasant-y food that's looked at by a lot of people as like, oh, chopped liver, it's disgusting, I don't want it. And, put it on this.
What am I, chopped liver?
Right. Put it on this very fine dining menu, and it found its place, and it became a very special thing. So I had to go through that process to become okay to work with this food and to do it.
So I know you're resonating to the deep questions. I have one more last deep question.
Sure. Which
is you get to ask God one question.
First, I've got to decide if I believe in God and all that, right?
No, we're assuming. I have this belief, first of all, that everyone believes in God.
Right.
Because the way I define God is something bigger than ourselves, right? When you wake up in the morning, you're not just saying, screw everyone around me. I'm going to do what I want my way. You think about the world.
Yeah.
And to me, that's coming from a place of God, right? So I always like to have arguments with people that say they're atheist. So assuming you believe
why am I not surprised?
I don't argue as much as your dad does, by the way. So, although I like to argue with your dad, but assuming you could ask God one question, and assuming you believe in God, what would that one question be?
Oh man, that's tough. I don't know. I mean, I really would have to think about that. I mean, I don't want to give the trite answer of, why do bad things happen and all that kind of stuff.
It's not trite if you mean it, because people, that is some semblance of a lot of the ways that people, I've asked that question now more than 70 times. And some people do get that, because it's, as an example, I just came back from India, and you walk through the slums of India and you think a couple things. First of all, there by the grace of God, I was born here in this country and have these opportunities, and the kids in the slum have no opportunities.
Yeah.
So you wonder why them and not me, right? So there is a less trite way of dealing with that if it's authentic to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I agree in wondering those things. For me personally, I never like to attribute that to God or whatever that idea may be. I mean, the world works in strange ways. People end up in different places. It's not fair. My dad's classic line to me my entire life isn't fair. And it is what it is. I don't know. There's no answer for that per se, and it's almost it's a very human thing to put that on this God figure, and I always struggle with how to do that.
All right, and by the way, we should, for the audience's sake, reference your dad's name, because your dad is Gary Wexler, and most people think he's one of the brilliant Jewish marketing minds, certainly of the last few decades. And so people should know that's who your dad is, because a lot of people in the Jewish world owe a debt to your dad for teaching them how to tell their story and get their message out.
I appreciate that, and he would too.
Yeah. Let's see if he listens to this. All right.
He'll listen.
So before I get to my either or game I play at the end of my podcast, it would be wrong of me not to ask you this question, which is, you get to eat in 3 restaurants anywhere in the world. Where are you going to eat?
Do these have to be current restaurants, or can this be any time period?
Well, I'd like to stay current, because then someone will go and say, wow, Micah Wexler turned me on to X restaurant.
Yeah. Okay, so number 1 would be Echebari. Restaurant in Spain.
Yeah.
I really would love to go there at some point. Let's see, 2, maybe Pujol in Mexico City.
Well, he's opening a restaurant downtown.
He is. That's true. I could wait a little bit longer until the one downtown opens. What else? I'd really like to check out White Rabbit
in Moscow.
Yeah, I think those would be my 3 today, at least.
All right, and to give your I never do this, but since I'm such a big fan of not just you, but of the restaurants, you now have 4 locations of the deli?
We have 4, yeah. So our first one was in downtown at Grand Central Market, then Santa Monica, Century City, and we recently opened in Palm Springs at the Arrive Hotel.
All right. It's the only restaurant that I wait in line is when I'm downtown is at the Grand Central Market.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's worth waiting in line.
Thank you.
Okay, so I end my podcast with an either or.
Okay.
Get, to pick one or the other.
So this is the part I like, the game part.
All right. Jerusalem or Tel Aviv?
Tel Aviv.
Okay. Nate and Al's or Langer's?
Langer's.
Well, they're fast. All right.
I'm very decisive about these things.
Corned beef or pastrami?
Oh, now that's a good one. I'm going to give pastrami the slight edge.
And usually I don't go into details, but I'm always questioning if I'm ordering one, which to order. In your mind, how do you describe the difference between pastrami and corned beef?
Okay, well, here's the thing you have to understand first. They start in the same place, okay, which is that they're made from a brisket. Some people use navel, but we use brisket, cured in the exact same way, and then that's where they deviate. So from that point, corned beef is slow cooked until it's nice and tender. It's done. Pastrami is coated with additional spices, smoked, and then slow cooked. So it's the addition of those spices and the smoke that really makes the difference. My entire life, I grew up as a pastrami guy. Corned beef was an afterthought to me, and it wasn't until I started making both myself that I really understood and gained an appreciation for corned beef. And what I like about it actually is just it's totally naked. It's pure. It's just kind of unadulterated beefiness. It doesn't have any place to hide, and when it's made properly, I really like that.
All right. I end my podcast. And we have some samples from Wexler's Deli with the same question. And sometimes people, believe it or not, Michael, think this question's harder than the God question.
All right.
Are you ready?
Because I really struggle with that one.
Yeah,
too.
This is the tougher one.
Yeah.
Babka, and we have some of yours here, or rugelach?
Oh, man, that is a good question. That's such a mood-based thing also. There's certain times for both. I think I would probably have to give the slight edge to rugelach.
Okay. Micah, first of all, I wish you well. I wish you, if it works, more children.
Thank you.
And much more delis.
Yeah,
Many more delis.
Thank you. Those are both good wishes. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.